The paper I'm going to give is partly based on the paper I published in the Bulletin some years ago, but I will mainly focus on new texts. Well, not new texts, but texts that have not been studied before. Okay. Since the publication of parts of his literary correspondence in 1938, Nicolaus Ellenboog, a Benedictine from the Abbey of Ottobeuren, has gained some renown as a representative of what is sometimes called Kloosterhumanismus, monastic humanism. In this paper, I will not deal with the question as to whether and in which sense he might be considered a humanist, a question that after Brian Copenhaver's critique of the historiographical label humanism requires special attention. Instead, it is my aim to show that Ellenboog was involved in a network of Bavarian astrologers who were interested not only in astral influences on human life, but also in the power of demons and the nearness of the apocalypse. A close reading of Ellenboog's largely unedited correspondence with Wolfgang Reichart, a physician also living in southern Germany, in Ulm, will contribute to a micro-historical reconstruction of this peripheral network. Before looking at these letters, which date from 1540, 1541, it is useful to remind that some 20 years earlier, Ellenboog wrote two texts that deal with the same topics. Together with his confrere and friend Christophorus Menzinger, Ellenboog co-authored a series of miscellaneous questions in which they discussed, among other things, the influence of the stars and planets on the sublunary world and especially on human beings. While Menzinger underlined that astral determinism is an erroneous and dangerous doctrine, according to Christian theology, Ellenboog attempted to defend the scientific nature and moral licitness of astrology, arguing that the heavenly bodies, though influencing human behavior, do not undermine free will. In support of this view, he approvingly quoted some riveting passages from John of Glogoff's treatise on the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, foreseen to occur in 1504. Before discussing the contents of this tract, Ellenboog emphasizes his relationship, his personal relationship with its author, as you can see in the first text of the handout. He introduces John of Glogoff as a most illustrious philosopher and astrologer, and notes that John wrote his tract 20 years earlier in 1502, at a time when he, the young Nicolaus, attended John's lectures on mathematics in Krakow. In Krakow, where also, as you know, Copernicus studied. Ellenboog knew John's tract quite well, since he must have owned a private copy, and he sent a copy of it in his own handwriting to two friends, Bernhard Adelmann and Marquard von Stein. His summary of John's text mentions only the most dramatic prognosis made by John. Ellenboog does not outline the overall structure of the treatise. The first part deals with the general question of how great conjunctions of stars and planets signify the advent of new prophets and announce changes in the political and moral life of people. The second part focuses not only on what is pre-signified by the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn on June the 10th, 1504, but also on the effects of some other conjunctions taking place in 3 and 4. Nor does Ellenboog refer to the principal astrological authorities adduced by John. For instance, Al-Bumashar, Ali Aben Ragel, Messahala, Aben Rudianus, and last but not least, Pierre d'Ailly, Petrus de Aliaco. Ellenboog does not even hint at 3 classical assumptions on which John of Glogov builds his astrology, namely Aristotle's claim that this inferior world necessarily has a certain contiguity with the superior motions, and consequently all its power is governed by them. Ellenboog doesn't mention Pseudo-Ptolemy's belief that the faces of this world are subject to the faces of the heavens. Nor does he refer to Augustine's doctrine that the briefing, glowing influence of the stars stands in a relation to sublunary bodies. Instead of all this, Ellenboog cites 7 of the so-called corollaria, or consequences of John's central thesis concerning the unhappy conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 1504. Ellenboog argues that the effects of the 1504 Great Conjunction now in the year 1522 appear more clearly. Why? Because great conjunctions, he says, and eclipses always manifest their influence after some lapse of time. Of course, that's a marvelous strategy that renders any falsification of such predictions impossible. Ellenboog's comments on John's prophecies reveal how much Ellenboog was convinced that the heavenly bodies exert a fatal power not only on the spiritual condition of individuals, but also on the vitality of political communities and whole religions. As you can see in the handout, text 1, discutiamus, the middle of page 1, discutiamus dicta glogovitae. First of all, John's prediction of the rise of a new and false religion is verified by the rise of the Lutheran heresy, according to Ellenboog. Second, John's claim that owing to the Great Conjunction, the Jews will be hopeful is also true, since they try to convert Christians to Judaism, with arguments that aim at undermining the dignity of Christ. Third, John's assertion that this conjunction will be hard for the Catholic people is confirmed by the faltering faith of the Catholic Church and by the chaos caused by Luther. Fourth, the prediction of the advantages which Muslims would derive from the Great Conjunction is proved, according to Ellenboog, by the victories of the Turks against Christianity and by the cowardice of Christian leaders unwilling to defend Christianity against its most violent enemy. Fifth, furthermore, John foretold that kings and other men participating in the nature of Mars would feel a mediocre state owing to this conjunction. Ellenboog discovers a confirmation of this somewhat vague prediction in the fact that Luther passes over in silence the vices of secular princes and noblemen while directing the entire force of his warfare against the clergy of the Pope and against the clergy and the Pope. And finally, it is clear, according to Ellenboog, that Luther, a Bohemian by birth, endeavors to play down and to defend the errors and heresies of the Bohemians. Ellenboog here alludes to the influence of Hussitism on Luther. And this proves, according to Ellenboog, the accuracy of John's claim that the restless nation of Bohemia, ruled by the sign of the lion, will not experience any damages or dangers originating from this maleficent conjunction. The selection of these corollaria gives evidence that Ellenboog accentuates the anti-Jewish, Islamophobic, and anti-heretical aspects of John's tract. It's worth mentioning that he omits more than 10 other corollaria, for instance those concerning the conjunctions nefarious influence on girls and women, on doctors of arts, philosophers, astronomers, astrologers, merchants, and young boys. Ellenboog concludes his vehemently ideological discussion of John's predictions with an observation that epitomizes his unyielding belief in the scientific nature and the predictive power of astrology. It's the end of the first passage in the handout. Haec breviter perstrinxi. I briefly skimmed over all of these events in order that you, his confrère Menzinger, will acknowledge that astrologers are able to predict everything about the change in moral habits and intellectual interests, and that their forecasts are not at all lies or old women's tales. Above all, this passage shows that Ellenboog, unlike, for instance, Thomas Aquinas, holds that astrology can predict everything about human behavior. Such a view tends to reduce human activity to a physical phenomenon chiefly determined by the nearly necessary forces of nature. In the end, Ellenboog seems to have wavered between a sort of compatibilism and a soft determinism. In his view, as expounded in his miscellaneous questions, human beings are definitely not able to freely develop themselves and to organize their lives in a truly autonomous manner. Around the same time, in 1522, Ellenboog composed an extensive, still unedited treatise against the necromancers, Contra Necromanticos. You have some passages from that tract in the second text on the handout. I hope to edit that text in the near future, but I don't know when. Anyway, in this text, Ellenboog attempts to debunk, to refute necromancy as a diabolical, superstitious practice. He quotes several passages, not only from ancient authors such as Augustine, Porphyry, Jerome, Lactantius, Pliny the Elder, and Origen, but also from more recent authors such as Nicholas of Lyra, Jean Gerson, Marsilio Ficino, and Reuchlin. In the prologue of this treatise, Ellenboog summarizes his main arguments against necromancy. The quotation I give starts on the fifth line, I think, of the text on the handout. Isn't it ridiculous, he says, isn't it ridiculous, or if you prefer, abhorrent, that a human being wants to have foreknowledge of the future with the aid of a demon? Why? Well, having true and infallible knowledge of the future belongs only to God, not to a demon. Hence, it is quite ridiculous to want to obtain from a demon what he cannot offer. In addition to that, if the demon knew the future, one should not trust his words, since he is a liar and does not stand in the truth. It's a quotation from the Bible. Accordingly, it's a sign of immense vanity to interrogate a liar about the truth and to try to get answers about the future from someone who is ignorant about the future. Demons are allowed to predict only that which is corporeal and which can be pursued by natural means, whether this occurs through the orbit of the stars or through dispositional qualities of natural things. By contrast, demons do not have any foreknowledge about things that do not depend on natural causes, except if their foreknowledge derives from revelation. Things that do not depend on natural causes, that are probably things that depend on the human intellect and the human will. But of course, we have seen that in his miscellaneous questions, he also tends to claim that moral habits and intellectual interests are also influenced by the stars. At the end of this treatise against the necromancers, Ellenboog narrates some stories that show that necromancy must have been a common practice in his time in southern Germany. Think also of scholars like Trithemius or Agrippa of Nettersheim. Yeah. Now, his father, the physician Ulrich Ellenboog, warned his sons, he says, warned his sons of the dangers of magical arts, telling them that an Ulm druggist, a druggist from the city of Ulm in Bavaria, practiced onychomancy, predicting the future on the basis of consideration of nails, fingernails. So his father told them that an Ulm druggist practiced onychomancy with his young daughter, who, owing to the diabolical practice, later became melancholic and lunatic. Nicolaus himself knows, he says, a priest in Memmingen, also in southern Germany, a priest in Memmingen who as a young man was directed toward necromancy by another necromancer. The priest died as a demented old man in jail. Ellenboog underlines that he is also acquainted with other necromancers. There's an entire circle of necromancers, apparently. He's acquainted with other necromancers who suffer paralysis. And last but not least, from an expert necromancer, experto necromantico, from an expert necromancer, he has heard, he says, that the devil never abandons those who deal with magical arts without depriving them of their bodily health and hurting them forcefully. A fortiori, the devil will harm them in the afterlife when they have been brought under his plenary power. Ellenboog hopes, that's what he says at the very end of his treatise, at the end of page 2 on the handout. Ellenboog hopes that his treatise will bring necromancers to stop their practices and that it will prevent those who have not yet been infected by that diabolical yeast from devoting themselves to magical arts. Speaks there of the fermento illo diabolico. Fermentum, it's reminiscent of the Bible, where fermentum is associated with malice. There are also passages in medieval sermons, for instance, in Thomas of Chopham's sermons, where fermentum is associated with the devil. Thomas of Chopham says that the devil uses fermentum to prepare his pasta. Very, very weird. As we will see, similar ideas are also present in the correspondence with Reichard. Their letters shed light on their astrological interests, as well as on their fascination with other occultist topics such as demonology and eschatology. Moreover, these letters open up a window on a network of learned men with shared literary and scientific or pseudoscientific interests. The group of scholars with whom Ellenboog exchanged letters on these topics includes Johannes Marquardi of Heidelberg, Jacob Stopel of Justingen, and Konrad Beutinger of Augsburg. Konrad Beutinger is, of course, the most famous guy. He's famous because of the so-called Tabula Peutingeriana, that map of the ancient Roman roadway system, which Konrad Scheltis donated to Beutinger. Okay, first section, fires, demons, celestial bodies, and apocalyptic fears. What's the background? Well, the background is the long summer of 1540. During that summer, southern Germany was afflicted by extreme drought, severe wildfires, and Arsonian anxiety. Anxiety produced by pyromaniacs. In his first letter to Reichardt, Ellenboog notes that while unprecedented events recently occurred in this world, he mainly wonders about a large number of incendiaries, extremely bad, desperate human beings, owing to whom both Lutherans and Catholics are being burned. They swear not to know the man who pays them for committing these crimes. While there are various theories, conjectures about the identity of the instigator, Ellenboog believes it must be a demon who with God's permission deceives those desperate adventurers and incites them day and night, as he is worse than any gadfly. Ellenboog links the arson attacks with other effects of Lutheranism, which he sarcastically calls the fruits of the new gospel. The conclusion of the letter is worth quoting, as it sheds light on the contacts between Reichardt and the abbey. You find the text on the handout, it's text 3. From my confriars, he says, I heard that you addressed this matter at the table of the abbot, while you were residing with us as our guest. However, I could not obtain any certain information from them. Therefore, most learned man, doctissime vir, I would like you to inform me in accord with your humane courteousness, which you displayed that night abundantly. And please explain me your opinion about the commander of the incendiaries. Take care. Oh. The fear that the fires had been raised by devilish arsonists or pyromaniacs is also at the center of Reichardt's reply to Ellenboog. Like Ellenboog, Reichard is convinced that hiring a mobile army of arsonist soldiers is so expensive that its supreme commander cannot be a man. Human beings value money much more than they value their own life or even immortal gods. Accordingly, the supreme commander must be a hypercosmic spirit who does not care about money. Reichert underlines that what strengthens him in his conviction is the appearance of 6 comets during the past 5 years. He himself observed 4 comets, he says, and other trustworthy people testified that they had seen 2 other comets. Furthermore, these comets were accompanied by the solar eclipse of 1539, which occurred in the fiery sign of Aries. Hence, Reichert infers that the magnificence of the element of fire will triumph while Mars will exert its powerful influence. In passing, Reichert notes, you can see that in text 4 in the handout, the 3rd line, Reichert notes that everything returns in a circle. Omnia redeunt circulo. This parenthetical remark, clearly reminiscent of Platonic and Stoic cosmologies, concisely expresses the cyclical worldview which underlies his astrological speculations. Strikingly, he combines this worldview with the belief that the influence of comets and Mars is contemporaneous with the intrigues of the martial demons, who not only caused a multitude of fires, but also kidnapped human beings, carrying them into the air, and who were mainly hostile toward priests. Reichert prefers to discuss this issue with Ellenboog in person, in order to avoid what happens to people ignorant of philosophy. And what happens to people ignorant of philosophy? Well, they posit numerous miraculous effects. Yeah? Multa ponere miracula. This remark clearly indicates that Reichard aims at presenting himself as a philosopher who, in line with a long tradition, attempts to banish miracula from the domain of philosophy. Just think of what Albert says in his commentary on Degeneratione et Corruptione about the relation between philosophy and miracles. Still, Reichert operates with a very broad Platonic or Neoplatonic understanding of philosophy, which also comprises demonology and astrology. Relying on Marsilio Ficino's Timaeus commentary, he distinguishes different kinds of demons. Saturn, for instance, Saturnine, jovial, and martial demons. And he holds that they can condense their bodies, subtle bodies, so as to perform human activities in the service of their proper stars. In support of this claim, Reichert also refers to Pliny the Younger's famous letter to Sura, which is mainly concerned with the reality of ghosts and the workings of ghosts. Besides these arguments based on authorities from ancient philosophical, non-philosophical literature, he also mentions the view of Christian theologians that God easily connives at the evilness of demons if they are assisted by human idolaters, as in the case of the witchcraft of sorceresses. While Reichert also dwells on the power of demons, witches, and necromancers in other letters, he here wants to elevate the discussion to a higher eschatological level. Paulo majora canamus, he says with Virgil, near the end of page 3 on the handout. Indeed, he fears that the fires are nothing but a prelude to the final completion and destruction of the world. In his view, this fear is not irrational, since Seneca in his Natural Questions and Ovid in his Metamorphoses already predicted that the universe would be conflagrated at a time determined by fate. There's that nice quote from Ovid, where it said that he remembers furthermore how by destiny a certain time should one day come wherein sea and land and heaven should burn and the huge work of the cosmos should be in distress and danger. More importantly, the Bible testifies, according to Reichard, that Christ on the throne of his glory will judge the world by fire. Reichard does not enter into the intricate scholastic discussions on the fiery cleansing of the universe, a topic thoroughly studied by Maria Sorokina in her monograph Les Sphères, les Astres et les Théologiens. For him, it suffices to underline the convergence of pagan cosmology and what he believes to be revealed truth. This is hardly surprising, given that he's not a theologian, but a physician with humanist interests. At the same time, his fatalism and existential anxiety can be regarded as a symptom of the apocalyptic mood, which seems to have been endemic among intellectuals in southern Germany around the middle of the 16th century. In his reply, Ellenboog points out that during his novitiate, he carefully studied all of Plato's works and also read Ficino's comments on planetary demons. Furthermore, Ellenboog observes in text 5 on the handout, observes that necromancers believe that demons are to be conjured up and constrained during determinate constellations. Therefore, they also aim They also claim that astronomy or astrology is absolutely indispensable for a perfect necromancer. Ellenboog, however, does not sympathize with their views. On grounds that he considers to be irrational, he holds that the stars have no power or influence whatsoever on demons. Good angels have their abodes above the spheres of the planets and are not affected by the stars, as they are constantly in presence of God's face. Since all evil spirits who have been expelled from heaven are by nature equal to the elected spirits, the celestial bodies have no power over them. They are called planets, they are called after planets only because of some similarity between their behavior and the nature of the celestial bodies. A so-called Saturnine demon, for instance, incites people to do the things Saturnine people pursue. Furthermore, Ellenboog adds that no theologian maintains that demons are corporeal substances, even though both good and evil spirits are able to take on bodies in order to appear to human beings. Leaving demons aside, Ellenboog turns toward Reichert's claim that the fatal events are due to an eclipse. That's the last paragraph of text 5. Since a solar eclipse consists of a conjunction of the moon and the sun and a concealment of the sun's disk, he asks Reichert whether it is the conjunction or the concealment or the combination of both together that is so monstrous that some terrible event must necessarily follow the solar eclipse on Earth. The conjunction occurs at least 12 times a year. If then the conjunction is harmful, one should attribute some horrible effect to each of these conjunctions, which would entail an endless series of evils. If the concealment of the sun is unpropitious, the evil effects should even be much more frequent, since the sun is often hidden by clouds and rain, and the sun's rays disappear every night during several hours. How then could a solar eclipse, which lasts only very briefly, as we have also observed last Saturday, how then could a solar eclipse elicit any long-term effects? Moreover, it is incorrect, according to Ellenboog, to suspect the moon of producing any ill-fated effect. Not only because Diana, the moon, is too far removed from Phoebus, the sun, to have any effect on the sun, but also because during the solar eclipse, the moon remains completely under the sun's rays. Ellenboog concludes his letter with expressing his wish to discuss these questions with his learned friend. Second part of this section on the letters deals with the broadening of the pleiad of authorities. In the above-mentioned letters, Ellenboog and Reichert cited only a few classical authorities, namely Plato, Ficino, Pliny, Seneca, and Ovid. In the subsequent letters, they broaden the pleiad of authorities. First of all, in text 6 on the handout, Reichert admits that Ellenboog's view on the nature of angels derives from the sources of sacred theology, while his own impressions were only based on his adolescent reading of the stories told by ancient poets about fauns, satyrs, dryads, and the descendants of the gods. Even today, Reichert takes Homer and Virgil to mean that our souls are conjoined to the immortal gods by an almost infinite number of bonds. This interpretation alludes to a Neoplatonic theory concerning the cosmic link between the terrestrial realm of human affairs and the supracelestial realm of the divine. The Neoplatonic background becomes even clearer in the following lines of Reichert's letter, where he proudly narrates that he studied philosophy, including metaphysics, in Vienna. It's also text 6 on the handout, the first paragraph of page 5. In Vienna, his teachers explained that according to Plato and Lucretius, there are Aryan tribes, gods living in the waters, in fire, on earth, muses who dedicate themselves to music in regions above the air, where immaterial minds and the blessed dwell, where their never-erring intelligences live, in the middle between God and humankind, with a view to perfecting the universe. Therefore they called Vulcanus, Rhea, Juno, and Neptunus the rulers of the elements, in order to playfully instill philosophy into uneducated people. However, Plato in particular used to hand down his teachings in an enigmatic way, whereas Aristotle used to cover his doctrine with the marvels of his words, as Aristotle's letter to King Alexander in Aulus Gellius makes clear. That's what we heard, Reichert said. That's what we heard as supplements for students in natural philosophy at the University of Vienna from the poet Conradus Celtis, from Johannes Cuspinianus, and from Hieronymus Balbus. Whereas Celtis, Cuspinianus, and Balbus, or if you prefer the Italian name Girolamo Balbi, are nowadays mainly known as humanist poets, this passage shows that Reichert appreciates them primarily as philosophers who endeavor to integrate the pagan gods into their own Aristotelian Platonic worldview. In line with their Christian reinterpretation of pagan mythology, Reichert maintains that demons are named after the planets and fulfill the tasks given by the planets. On this point, he is able to follow Plato himself and Marsilius, Plato's soul. That's also remarkable that Marsilio Ficino is called Plato's soul. And he corroborates their view with the Aristotelian idea that a form gives the thing its being. That's to say, its definition and name. Since all demons perform the activities that are proper to their particular planets, it is fitting to assign them epithets in accord with the activities of their planets. Philosophy for Reichert apparently consists in an uncritical repetition and combination of older authorities. He also quotes Pythagoras' autos epha. While Reichert agrees more or less with Ellenboog's views on the aforementioned issues, he discards Ellenboog's arguments against the influence of eclipses. As elegant, he refutes that as elegant triflings. On this issue, Reichert appeals to the authority of Peter of Abano, text 6 on the handout, Peter of Abano, the conciliator, and Johannes Carrion, early 16th century, less known German astrologer, historian Carrion or Nägelin. Peter of Abano, quoted in text 6. Peter of Abano compares the detrimental impact of an eclipse on the world to the effect of a great syncope and swoon on a human being, swoon, lipotomia. And Carrion attributes nearly all events that occur in their time to eclipses. Furthermore, Reichert points out that according to Aristotle, the heavenly bodies generate effects in the sublunary world by means of their light, motion, and influence. That's a text around footnote 71. Even in the most hidden, deepest parts of the earth, which their celestial rays cannot reach, they produce precious minerals. How exactly eclipses cause so many evils is a question Ellenboog has to answer. Reichert himself complies with Avicenna, who holds that physicians have to believe natural philosophers and astrologers and to use their conclusions as the principles of medicine. It's the end of the first paragraph on page 6 of the handout. Despite his alleged lack of astrological knowledge, Reichert underlines that the science of the stars is implanted in the inmost workings of medicine in such a manner that every power that is first in the elements and later in the complexion of the human body, the humors, the bodily parts, the spirits, and the operations of the microcosm human being, that this power is governed by the superior motions of the heavens. In this context, he not only refers to Galen, but also quotes Averroes' well-known dictum, according to which nature acts only as it is minded from above. Text around footnote 77. The dictum is included in the Auctoritatis Aristoteles. It's often quoted, also, for instance, by Eckhart as Alessandro, as shown in his paper Eckhart's Islamic and Jewish Sources. Nature acts only as it is minded from above, from the stars, the heavens. Even though the stars influence this world in a necessary manner, they produce their causal effects contingently, owing to the disposition of matter. Still, Reichert maintains that all events occurring in the realm of medicine are produced by the stars. Physicians, however, attempt to heal individuals whose concrete dispositions are subject to contingent and unforeseeable vicissitudes, while scientific knowledge is concerned only with universal and necessary truths. That's also why they are compelled to adore astrologers. At the end of his letter, Reichert adds that he is also sending printed images of the arsonists, which apparently have forms resembling the signs whereby astrologers indicate Mars and the archer in their tables. These pictures should prove, according to Reichert, that the power of the heavens is imprinted in the soul. In his reply, Ellenboog quotes Messahala to the effect that a solar eclipse must be a sign of some great accident proportional to the size of the eclipse. Hence, he infers that the recent complete eclipse will necessarily be followed by a great effect. One such effect is the unusual heat and dryness of 1540, produced by the cooperation of the Sun and Mars. Reichert apparently forgot to respond to Ellenboog. In a short letter sent some 3 months and a half later, Reichert tackles another question. He mentions that according to Bernard Gordonius, medical professor in Montpellier in the late 13th, early 14th century, Reichert mentions that according to Bernard Gordonius, the opposition of celestial bodies has only a momentary influence. This claim is confirmed, he says, by Johannes Schöner, a Nuremberg astrologer, who asserts that there is no risk in performing a phlebotomy one day after such a celestial opposition. Since other astrologers he consulted claim that Gordonius is wrong, he now wants to hear Ellenboog's opinion on this matter. So Ellenboog apparently is considered to be an authority in astrology. Less than 2 weeks later, Ellenboog sent a reply wondering why I did not get an answer to his previous letter. In answer to Reichert's question concerning the opposition of celestial bodies and its influence, Ellenboog cites Guido Bonatti, that's text 7 on the handout. He cites Guido Bonatti, you all know Guido Bonatti, who is also mentioned, astrologer mentioned by Dante in Canto 20 of the Inferno, mentioned almost together with Michael Scott. He cites Guido Bonatti, who holds that a celestial opposition is a bad sight, a sight aiming at complete hostility and evilness. Accordingly, one should avoid performing phlebotomies when the moon's side is opposite to Saturn or Mars, or also during the conjunction of the sun and the moon. Still, given that such oppositions mainly have a bad effect on unfortunate events, infortunae, not necessarily on phlebotomies, Ellenboog subscribes in the end to Gordonius' view, adding that the bad influence of the moon should not be overestimated. In support of this opinion, he quotes Halley Abenragel, the famous 10th, 11th century astrologer active in Spain and Tunisia. He quotes Halley Abenragel, according to whom the moon is around the sun. It's a very nice passage. It's in italics on page 7, I think. According to whom the moon is around the sun like an alguazil, an ambassador or legate around his king. As soon as the alguazil rises to the level of the king's power, the king starts divesting him of the high authority he had given him before. Likewise, the moon's influence totally depends on the sun. 1 week later, Reichert replies that the local pharmacist, the only person in Ulm who is considered to have some astrological knowledge, and that's probably the son of the druggist mentioned by Ellenboog's father. So Reichert replies that the local pharmacist fully agrees with Ellenboog's arguments. Reichert himself enjoys reading the citations from Bonatti and Halley. He even compares the quotation from Halley to a precious gem, precious stone. In a much later letter, Ellenboog returns to the topic of arsonism, drawing Reichert's attention to Erasmus' letter to Damian of Goes, in which he tells how a demon set on fire and burned the little town of Schiltach in the Black Forest. According to Ellenboog, the story reported by Erasmus lends credibility to their own conjectures. You can see that in text 8 on the handout. And then there are some letters on the Turkish Lutheran connection, texts 9 and 10. I don't know whether I still have time for these letters.
Yeah, you go. Please.
Yeah, okay.
You still have time.
So Reichert's and Ellenboog's remaining letters are mainly devoted to the Turkish threat, which both, like many of their contemporaries, envisage within an apocalyptic framework that had much in common with the last emperor prophecies. Near the end of September 1541, Reichert writes about the so-called tragedy that leads him to make the pessimist, sort of last generation comment that it would have been better for his children never to have seen this disastrous light than to fall into the present tyranny. Underscoring the fatality of the situation, he quotes the well-known verse from Luke, chapter 3, according to which the axe has already been placed at the root of the trees. This quasi-apocalyptic line introduces his dramatic account of the fall of Buddha, not the Eastern Buddha, but Budapest, which occurred a few weeks earlier. At the end of this letter, see text 9 in the handout. At the end of this letter, Reichert asks Ellenboog what he conjectures about the future on the basis of past and present events, what his mind foretells him, and which advice he could give him. What's happening? What's happening? And what's going to happen? In his reply, Ellenboog claims that the cruel defeat of the Christian army was exactly what they deserved, since they are miserably abandoning, he says, their own faith. If the Ottomans are not expelled from Hungary, Austria will also soon be subjected. Still, Ellenboog hopes, as he says in text 10 on the handout, he hopes that with God's help, Christians will be able to regain the lands they lost during the last decades, for time has not yet come to destroy the Turks completely, nor will it be possible for Jerusalem to return Christian hands. Ellenboog substantiates his view with what he calls a truth-telling prophecy. What's this truth-telling prophecy? Quotation from Luke chapter 21, Jerusalem will be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the nations are fulfilled. Ellenboog is aware that there are various interpretations of this prophecy. It could also refer to the Jewish diaspora or to the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem. But on his own reading, it gives the explanation why Christian crusaders have not yet been able to free Jerusalem. Reichert in text 11 fully agrees with Ellenboog's interpretation. He even expresses his hope or his unrealized wish that what Johannes Carrion in his global chronicle writes about the nearing end of the world, and what Origen in his commentary on Matthew writes about the universal predication of the gospel, that these observations are nearby prophecies of the advent of the last judgment. Caught in a double bind, Reichert fears that the day of the Lord will overwhelm them like a thief in the night. Nearly always one is lost as soon as the situation is replete with prophetic signs. And that's precisely what happened to the Jews, who recognized Christ as God's Son only after his crucifixion, he says. Ellenboog replies that Reichert, text 12 on the handout, that Reichert should not be afraid of the end of the world, but rather be absolutely certain that they will not experience those times, since some of the signs that must precede the end of the world have not yet appeared. Instead of worrying about the end of the world, they ought to take care of the end of their lives. The moral and spiritual care of the self is, so to speak, more important than worries about the future, and especially worries about the apocalyptic future. They should take care of the end of their lives, fully conscious that at that moment they will have to account for all of their actions and thoughts. I come to my concluding remarks. Renaissance authors, not unlike their ancient and medieval models, write literary letters not only in order to expound some of their ideas, but also to represent themselves and to establish and strengthen their social and intellectual networks. This performative function of letter writing can also be detected in the Ellenboog-Reichert correspondence. Most of their letters start and/or end with paragraphs that underline the importance of their letters for their friendship. Moreover, their letters inform us about their wider network. Although the Ellenboog-Reichert correspondence primarily informs us about the friendship between both men, other figures who belong to their circle are also mentioned. Both refer to the convivial dinner at which Reichert talked with the abbot and other monks about the pyromaniacs. Furthermore, Reichert tells he discussed one of Ellenboog's astrological letters with the local pharmacist. and he thanks Ellenboog for sending him a printed copy of Ulrich Ellenboog Sr.'s concise tract on the plague. More famous scholars mentioned by Ellenboog are Peter Zoeter and Erasmus. Zoeter, a jurist whom Ellenboog praises as an utmost learned and integer doctor, and above all as his most generous Maecenas, provided him with an Hebrew Bible and perhaps also with other manuscripts or printed books. Zoeter was also one of his correspondents who shared his interests in Kabbalah and astrology. And although Erasmus once praised the pure and simple style of Ellenboog's letters, the latter never managed to become a member of Erasmus' Familia. Hence, it's no wonder that even in 1541, almost 5 years after Erasmus' death, Ellenboog did not know whether or not the edition of Erasmus letters printed by Froben in 1538 was a posthumous publication. Still, by quoting humanists such as Erasmus and Ficino, Ellenboog attempts to profile himself as a well-read and well-connected citizen of the new Respublica Literarum. Reichert is a rather ephemeral visitor of Ellenboog's network, as he appears in Ellenboog's correspondence infrequently and only in the years 1540-1541. Nevertheless, these letters are quite illustrative of the cultural mindset of early and mid-16th century Bavarian intellectuals. If Ellenboog's letter correspondence with Reichert is read together with the letters he exchanged with Marquardi, Stopel, and Peutiger, one might get the impression that Ellenboog was at the center of a network of second-rank humanists who were eager to speculate on astrological, demonological, and eschatological issues. Yet this impression is wrong. Surely, it cannot be denied that Ellenboog and his correspondents constituted a local network that connected Otto Beuren with towns like Heidelberg, Ulm, Justingen, and Augsburg. This, however, does not prove that Ellenboog was, so to speak, the central vertex in the network of Bavarian intellectuals. For obvious reasons, the Abbey of Otto Beuren, located in the Bavarian periphery, could not compete with university centers like Basel, Heidelberg, and Vienna, or with Nuremberg, often considered the literary and artistic capital of the German Renaissance. Still, through the intertextuality of his writings, Ellenboog connects Otto Beuren with the universe of late medieval and Renaissance intellectuals, in which philosophy is intertwined as much with astrology and magic as with theology, including demonology and eschatology. I thank you for your attention.